Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, for the fall that has come in around us. We thank you for being with us and blessing us with the warmth of the fellowship of our congregation, especially of this group that's assembled around your word. Lord, be with us and bless us and help us to grow deeper as we serve you and as we learn from you. Thank you for this story of Moses and of the people, and help us not only to see them but to see ourselves as you point towards us and all the blessings that you've given to us. We give you this time in Jesus' name. Amen. So now last week, in the last few weeks, we have been from chapter 19 to 24 up to the brow of Sinai, and then in the middle of 24 up to the middle of Sinai after the giving of the Ten Commandments with the elders there. And remember that vision, that communion event of the elders and Moses, Joshua, them dining, so to speak, with Yahweh, and even the elders having a vision of Yahweh there. From chapter 24, then Moses goes up into the cloud where Yahweh is on the top of the mountain. And this resonates, this little picture of Yahweh on the top of the mountain resonates throughout the rest of the Bible, especially into the New Testament. We'll talk about some of that next week, especially. I want you to see, though, so last week we looked here at chapter 25 through 31. And up there, God gives Moses this design. Really makes Moses the earthly architect of his tabernacle. And the purpose of the tabernacle is, he says, so that I can go with my people and then I can be with them. I can dwell among them. And that word shakan shows up in lots of things. S-H-A-K-A-N. Now in Hebrew, the vowels kind of come and go. They fit the specific word, but a given word can mean different things with the changing of the consonants. With the changing of the vowels that are in them. The same set of consonants can have different. What I mean is every word has basically just 3 consonants to it. So shakan, what I'm saying is SH is really just one letter. The sheen, SH is written like a little bow. But anyway, so S-K-N, shakan. Now, if you think about that word, shakan means to dwell, or and literally to tent in a place. Shakan is the exact same word, though. The Hebrew word that's come into our English vocabulary for God it's also the word then for God dwelling in a place. And what do you call the presence of God? That's the Shekinah, the Shekinah of God. Notice it has the same vowel consonants in it. S-H-K-N, the Shekinah. And the only thing that's changed is the vowel in the middle. Shakan, S-H-A-K-A-N, S-H-E, we write it, K-I-N. So anyway, Shekinah, Shakan, all that just is about dwelling, and we use just that one Hebrew word about God. So anyway, that's the purpose of the tabernacle. The tabernacle is just the English word that was kind of invented for this space. It's a big tent. And so we looked at portraits of as Bible readers have sort of depicted those things. I meant to bring to you today, Bobby Fuller has done a great little picture of Bobby Wright makes cartoons in his spare time, and they're beautifully drawn and elaborate little pen and ink drawings. And anyway, he has one that he made of the tabernacle, and it has a little prayer out beside it, and it says, Lord, about that tabernacle, did you really mean all this stuff to be in it? That's really hard and elaborate for us to try to put together. And it's a cute little thing, but it is quite an elaborate thing. What I want you to see for this morning is the tabernacle instructions are the 6 chapters that we looked at before. Next week, all we'll have left are the 6 chapters 35 to 40. That's the end of the book of Exodus. Well, these 6 chapters are almost an exact replication of the tabernacle instructions. In other words, God said to Moses, build it like this. these 6 chapters are, and then Moses telling them, build it, and they built it like this, like that, like what God said to do. So much so that most commentaries that comment on this section of the book just say, and of course everything I say over here applies over here as well. And so they usually just comment on them together. So what I want you to see is what's right in the middle between, so here's the building that God told Moses about. Here's the building that Moses has the people build, or the tent and the whole elaborate structure. But anyway, and right between it is our incident for today, the golden calf story. And and one of the questions is, now wait a second, I thought this was a story about idolatry. What does this have to do with that? This story about God's presence and God going with them in God's sanctuary. What do they have to do with each other? And so that's one question that we have as we come to these chapters for today. So now this is Moses up on the mountain, and this story starts right there while Moses is up on the mountain. And God has said at the close of that, okay, God's given him all those instructions about what they're doing. Remember, we had said the tabernacle story, remember how it is patterned on the creation stories at the beginning of Genesis. And so one thing that you might expect to see, if here God has patterned the building of the tabernacle and the creation stories, what follows immediately in the creation stories in Exodus? What happens right after that? The fall of Adam and Eve. Yeah, their fall into sin. And so that's a little foretaste in a way. If you think, well, this is so strongly patterned on the 7 days of creation, and the mountain itself is the mirror of creation, the sea and the land, and then Jerusalem as the mount to which everybody goes up. So if this is patterned on the creation itself, well, then we might have a little premonition that what would come next, and that's exactly what does happen. What comes next is, we've gotten our Garden of Eden back. Well, yeah, but we have to put people in it. And so, what happens when we put people in it? And the answer is, well, basically the same thing. And so that's where we start. And the threat of sin, as Moses comes down from the mountain, as we have read this last week, we're tempted to read it and think, and particularly when we look at the pictorial representations of it, in our mind we think, okay, this is how it was done. It's already completed. It's already finished. And this story is all about, well, no, actually it's not. So far, all that's happened is God has put the picture of the very elaborately in the mind, the head of Moses. Where does it exist on earth? So far, it's nowhere else. When Moses comes down the mountain, he's still just carrying the tabernacle in his head. So you and I have already sort of leaped ahead. We know about the tabernacle. We know what it's supposed to be. We know what's going to happen there. What's the purpose of it? The beauty of the connection it's supposed to make. Oh, wait a second. It hasn't happened yet. It's still just a picture in Moses' head so far. And everything about it, well, let's just go on. So now let's start. Actually, we won't go on. Let's actually start. Chapter 32. Now, when the people, who remember are down at the foot of the Mount Sinai, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron. And this is literally, they gathered against Aaron. So it's not just, oh, well, they all came together, hey, Aaron, we want to talk to you about. No, they're coming in a very intimidating kind of mood, in a spirit of, hey, what's going on here? You better give us an answer. You better do something. So that word gathered against Aaron, it could say, and would give more of a spirit of it. They gathered against Aaron, and they said to him, come make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, notice they're already as if they've never heard him before. They've only heard him once. And who cares about that guy anyway? It's very deprecating the way they say this. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, you see, like that was nothing. We don't know what's become of him. Now, of course, he's been up there 40 days and 40 nights. So there is a strong absence. And it does say to them, everything that we thought we knew up here and that we've been filling our minds, all of this is for the people. This is all for the good of the people. The people haven't tasted that. Now there's a good reason for that. because the people, remember, when they got to Mount Sinai, remember the first thing they said to Moses was, you go up there, you talk to that God. We don't even want to hear from him. Remember, Moses had said, and they had said, well, first of all, let's get this ground rule. You're going to talk to Yahweh, and then you talk to us. We don't want to hear from God. So that fear was there, and in a way that fear now creates this big gap, and it creates definitely the gap between them, because Moses up on the mountain has grown closer and closer and closer. So Moses, so to speak, is filled with God. And by the end of this time, that's the way we'll see him exactly filled, and so much with God it just pours out of him. It spills out of him, and you can't not see it. But so while Moses has been filled, the people are absolutely empty. And we have to keep that in our mind, because it very much influences the interpretation of what they're doing at the foot of the mountain. We have so many, this is an easy kind of story that we've heard or seen or just sort of heard referred to throughout our lives. And it's very normal that we would think about this story in a way that really is not in the story as it's written. So, come make gods for us, they say to Aaron, who go before us. Notice, go before us. We need some presence of God to go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. Aaron said to them, take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters. Bring them to me. So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears, and they brought them to Aaron. Now, of course, these are the things they got from the Egyptians, but so they're wearing them very proudly, you see. And so in a way, remember, on the mountain, remember, Moses had heard, now you'll build this tabernacle, the place for my presence, out of everything that's willingly offered to you. Well, now notice, the people are starting really the same way. They don't know about the tabernacle yet, but in effect they're kind of reinventing the tabernacle, and that's the point. They are kind of making the tabernacle for themselves, and in effect their anxiety is pushing them to say, we need something like the tabernacle. They don't even know that name yet, that word yet, that thing yet. But so what God has been thinking up and giving to Moses in the time gap, they are now saying, we need something like this that will say to us, God is really here. So, this kind of poor mimicking of what Moses would ask them to do. Contribute you willingly your silver and gold and precious things. They're doing to Aaron for this false offering. Aaron said to them, take off your gold rings. They all did, and they brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from them, formed it in a mold, and cast the image of a calf. Now this is very unclear in the Hebrew exactly what's going on, and nobody knows exactly what this means. The Hebrew says literally, he took the gold and he formed it what? The Hebrew says literally, in a bag. What? And then put it in the fire. He himself says that. I threw it in the fire. So it's hard to say, and that's why our interpreters in the New RSV have said, well, formed it in a mold. That's because obviously it came out in a shape. That's just very characteristic of things that are going on all around them. All of their pagan neighbors have animal god representations, and they don't worship the figure itself. They're worshiping the god through the figure, but still they have animal figures, and the most common one is the figure of a young bull. A picture of, you see, strength and vitality and vigor, also a symbol of fertility. And, one of the common problems, even for the Israelites was, that's part of their, while they were in bondage. Wow, but look, we're producing babies all the time. Isn't that great, So anyway, this is a symbol for all of the people around them. So when the calf, the gold calf comes out, it's something that they're in a way kind of expecting. Anyway, and they cast it in an image of a calf. So in other words, it's something they recognize. And they said, these are your gods, O Israel. Now, here's the false interpretation that we always make of this. The people immediately fell into a kind of pagan idolatry like the other nations around them. Well, notice, they're not worshiping like the other nations around them. They are worshiping in the wrong way. They are violating the covenant. But I guess the question is, which commandment are they breaking? what we're tempted to say is they're breaking the first commandment. You shall have no other gods besides me or before me. But what I want to suggest to you is they're not breaking the first commandment, they're breaking the second commandment. So they're breaking a commandment, they're destroying the covenant, but the one they're breaking is they're worshiping their God in the wrong way. Because notice what they go on to say. These are your gods. Well, now, this is kind of confusing because Elohim is also a word used for their God, Yahweh. It's just the generic word for God, and it's plural. So if you say it plurally, so it sounds like, oh, so they're expecting to make a bunch more gods. No, they're not. These are your gods, O Israel. But notice the next thing they say, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. So they're talking about that God who brought them up here. And notice Aaron says the same thing. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. Okay, again, this is exactly what Moses had been instructed to do with the tabernacle, right? On the outer court, there's an altar. In the inner court, before the high priest can enter into the Holy of Holies, there's another altar. So, altars, that's part of the process of... So, in a way, they're almost imagining and making up out of their own minds this thing that they need. But God has said, well, here's the way that you do it in a way that will be acceptable to me. I'm your God, and this is the way I want to be worshipped. And He has already said to them, you won't worship me by making any idols, any figures of me. And notice in the tabernacle, as we've heard it described, this is one of the things that God goes to great lengths to put away. One of the whole points of saying nobody gets to go in there to where the Ark of the Covenant is, where the cherubim is. I don't want you to sit there and look and imagine, oh, the cherubim are really God, or God looks something like a bigger cherubim, or in a way. So God is protecting Himself. Of course, He's done that by giving them this name, I will be who I will be. So that name already says, you know, I'm always going to be different than you expect me to be. So you will always have to listen and obey me. You'll always have to follow after me. So when the people get into this business of making this idol, that's the thing that God is prohibiting in the Ten Commandments. But they say, these are your gods. He built an altar before it. Aaron made proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a festival to whom? Again, it's not to any other gods. Notice it says, a festival to Yahweh. So Aaron mistakenly thinks he's leading them to worship in the right way. Now again, remember, all the right instruction has happened only in Moses' head, and they haven't gotten it, so they're making it up for themselves. So God will be mad at them. Moses will be mad at Aaron, but still, we can at least see they are trying to answer the question that God was answering with the tabernacle. All they had to do was wait until Moses got down the hill, and they would have gotten it all for themselves, instead of running ahead and trying to make it. Tomorrow shall be a festival to Yahweh. They rose early the next day, and they offered burnt offerings, and they brought sacrifices of well-being. Well, again, notice this is the sacrifices that we've seen on the altars. One sacrifice of burnt offering that's burnt entirely up. One sacrifice that's the grilled thing that everybody shares. So, yeah, that's, you know, they're trying to do the right thing in the wrong way. And the people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to revel. Does anybody have a different translation than revel? This word literally means to sing. And some commentators say what they're trying to do, remember they said, make gods to go before us. What they're trying to reimagine is the God that will fight for them, like Yahweh has fought for them in fighting against the Pharaoh, in fighting against Pharaoh's army. And you remember the last thing they did, or really the first thing they did on the other side of the sea. After Yahweh won the victory, what's the next thing that they did? Chapter 15. They made a big song. They sang. Everybody sang this song. The Lord has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider He has thrown into the sea. So, and that's what this says. What's translated here as they sat down and they rose up and to revel, which has often then been translated, well, if we're thinking about pagan idolatry here, oftentimes we've talked about the priests who would do their rituals naked. Okay, well that gets us thinking, oh boy, you know, our favorite topic, this must have all had a sexual flavor. And for generations, centuries, this little passage, they sat down and they rose up to revel, because it's been interpreted as they wanted to be like the people around them, has naturally led into, oh, well, what did revel mean? It meant they started having sex with each other. They had sex parties. They had a big orgy. And you see, no, that's not what's in here. And it's just as easy and better in terms of, well, what have they been through and have they done? The rising up to sing means they're worshiping again their God in the wrong way, in the way that He has said, I won't be worshipped like this. It is like the worship of the gods around them, but that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to worship their God just in the wrong way. The people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to sing. So we could just as easily say they're singing that victory song again. They're singing that. So there's not necessarily any sort of sexual orgiastic implication here whatsoever. But it does show that they're trying to invent the need. They're trying to answer the need on their own, to answer their own prayer, so to speak, their own need for a God who dwells among them. God has given Moses all the instructions to do that. And so the irony of the story is that here, the very thing that they're doing to try and answer the need that God has already answered and given to Moses now threatens to destroy the building of this tabernacle. When they worship like this, they are threatening by this was Yahweh talking to Moses. Now let me alone, so that my wrath may burn hot, literally may blaze out against them, and I may consume them. And of you I will make a great nation. Now there's a lot in here. First of all, one interesting thing is this part of the story overturns every picture that we have of God, of the Old Testament God. And it says to us, start your thinking about God from the picture that's in the stories of Israel, not the other way around. Don't make some picture of, well, if God is omnipotent, if God is omniscient, if God is all of those things, unchangeable, and all of those things just get plowed through here. And what we have is what's called a very anthropomorphized picture of God. In other words, God is here portrayed in a very human way, as if God had very human emotions. And right now, God is just peeved. He's just mad. And the funny thing is, in this particular story now, Moses and Yahweh, in effect, switch places. Now, the purpose of doing that is to say, oh, really, look how much Moses has grown. Remember, at the beginning, Moses was the one that was like, oh, I don't want to go, God, I can't speak. Well, they'll be embarrassed. Well, they'll say, So, in a way, what we've been seeing all along is Moses growing. And so, in a way, Moses had become so much the equal of God that now in this conversation, it's God who's the one who's just, it throws a little hissy fit. And so, I mean, just listen to what he says. The first thing he says is, Moses, have you seen those people of yours? Well, now, whose people are they? Moses is going to have to remind Yahweh, you are the one who reached in and grabbed all these people and said, they're mine. You just killed all of the firstborn in Egypt to say, this is my son. These are mine. And you have to know it. So when God says, have you seen those people of yours and what they're doing, the ones you brought up from Egypt? Moses is going, now come on, big fella. So he's having to argue Yahweh out of being too mad. And this little, in verse 10, where Yahweh says, now let me alone. You see, I just want to sit and stomp my feet, or I just want to walk around in a circle and blow smoke out of my ear, or whatever, let me alone, Moses. And so this becomes the whole problem. And in a way, it's a very humanized way to say, this is the problem. The second side of the tabernacle, you see, we've been talking about the tabernacle as a place where God's presence will be realized. But in a way, it's a very complex thing, because the whole promise of the tabernacle is, how can the holy God really dwell in the midst of an unclean, unholy, profane people, like all people are? How can He do that and go with them and be with them? That's the real sort of thing that tears apart every conception that we might have brought about God with us. This God is not like anyone else. And so so he's saying that this very human portrait, I'm just so mad I could spit, is expressing, the kind of constant dilemma in a way that it is for God. If I am holy and have made this world and my plan is to make it holy and to make a distinctive holy people to myself, then, holiness, everything about the word holiness is about separation. How can I be both separate so that I am unique? There's no God like me, and I'm making a people who are like me. There will be no other people like them unless they become exactly like them as they become like me. How then can God tolerate the presence of those people without His holiness wiping them out? How can they come into His presence so that they can become more holy? So this is the whole problem. And in a way, it's why it stresses the position of Moses. And in this way, we see the unique, the great theological writing of the Middle Ages was by a priest of the Canterbury, England, named Anselm. And Anselm wrote a very short little book, little pamphlet really, called Cur Deus Homo, Why God Man. We would say, why did God become man? And really the issue is, why did God have to be human? You see, in other words, why did God have to send His own Son? And the answer that he came up with is, because God had to send someone like Himself, utterly holy. But in a way, God is so holy, He had to send Himself, and yet in some way send someone who was distinct from Himself. So the first picture that we have is, you see, Moses is that person. He is that mediator. So in this story, he's becoming more and more like God. It will ultimately be a problem because Moses can't become enough like God. And the end of the Moses story, as you saw with Brad Sherrill, I hope you saw that, was, that there's this story at the end of the Numbers depiction of Moses. Well, Moses finally does something that makes God say, I'm sorry, Moses, you have sinned against me now. You see, you've been perfect all along, but now you've sinned too. And that's why you're not going in with the people. Well, that's a little picture to say Moses is becoming more and more like God. But ultimately, he would have to be God, wouldn't he? In some way, how could you have a human that was God? Well, of course, that's the Christmas story is the answer to that question, isn't it? But it's not just a newspaper puzzler, It's the puzzle of all of history. But so anyway, it's being depicted here in this story. Well, these people are just being people, and they're trying to do the right thing. But they're already breaking the covenant that they just made with Yahweh. So now, how does Yahweh draw near to them when they have splashed open their sinfulness before Him? How can Yahweh... and so, the humanized depiction is that Yahweh now just goes, that's it, I'm done with you. I don't want anything to do with you. And Moses is going to have to say, wait a second, come on now, let's talk about this. You can't just give him up. And that's exactly what he does. Notice it says, let's go on. Now let me alone. But Moses implored Yahweh his God, verse 11, and said, oh Yahweh, why does your wrath burn hot against, now notice what he says, against your people? You see, they're not my people. Come on. They're your people. You are the one who took them to yourself, whom you brought out. Again, I didn't bring them out. I didn't make up 10 plagues. I don't have the power to blow the sea back and keep it open all night for people to walk through on dry. You brought them to yourself, you see. So you can't, in other words, turn against them. You've already set yourself on this, and they belong to you. Verse 12, why should, now here's his first argument. Why should the Egyptians, you did all of that just to defeat the Egyptians and their way of running their world. Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains, to consume them from the face of the earth? You see, you said, I'm going to free them to bring them out here. Oh, you just brought them out here just to slap them all down and slaughter them all? Well, then the Egyptians will say, whew, good riddance. Glad we didn't get tangled up with that God. So Moses saying, so why should you let the Egyptians celebrate, basically? Turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and don't bring disaster on your people. Point 2, verse 13. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and now notice, what belongs at the end of that phrase? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why does he stick Israel in there? Well, remember Jacob's name. It is Jacob's name. It was changed to Israel. Israel highlights, remember, Israel means the one who struggles with God, the one who wrestles with God. So when he says, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, in a way he's saying, remember, you already had some pretty cantankerous, recalcitrant people that you've called your own. In fact, this is your promise, that you're going to fulfill your promise to this family. So, well, now, come on, you're not surprised that they turned out to be this rebellious crew. Remember, you've always been working with this rebellious type crew. Remember, Abraham lied his pants off every chance he got, selling his wife as his sister. You know, come on, big fella, you know. This is your task. This isn't something different. This is more of what you set yourself to do, you know. So, in a way, so much of this is like a marriage thing. You know, you get to the place where you say, you know, remember, you know, better or worse. You know, well, you know, okay, now we're in the worst, aren't we? You know, well, that isn't what kills our marriage. This is the other part of our marriage. This is where we make it. So anyway, that's what he's saying to him. Remember, you made this promise, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel. Or your servants, you swore to them by your own self, Yahweh. You said to them, and now we didn't even know Moses knew this story. This must be a story he heard from his mom, on his mom's lap. Because notice, he quotes exactly what's in our Bible. You said to them, I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I promised I'll give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. So Moses quotes Genesis to Yahweh. And Yahweh, and again, we have to change our portrait, whatever it was of God before, because this is, in a way, the most amazing sentence in the whole Bible. And Yahweh changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. Now again, it's not a metaphysical statement about the being of God. It's a statement about the God of Israel, whom we only can know on the way we know things. So it's not a magical, you know, we thought God lived in this little chamber untouchable by himself. No, Yahweh changed his mind as a way of saying now Moses and Yahweh are talking, as the story will say in just a few verses, face to face as a man talks to his friend. So they really are, and Yahweh is really now on a level with Moses and really speaking with him that way. Okay, verse 15. Then Moses turned. God had said, you need to get down that mountain. He turned and went down from the mountain, carrying the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hand. Now notice the repetition here. Tablets that were written on both sides, written on the front and the back. Well, that would kind of be on both sides, wouldn't it? Written on the back. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved upon the tablets. Now, why is he emphasizing? Well, in a way, just to say, these were special. These were really special things he had. So that we don't, you know, because the next thing that we're tempted to say is that Moses came down, he saw what the people were doing, he just went, oh, I'm so mad, now I'm like God, you know, I could just spit. You know, he's not just breaking. What he's doing is a very symbolic thing. He's saying to them, you have broken this precious covenant that is written on these tablets, that God has written with his own very finger. Look, this is what you've done. You've made it like this. This has all gone to dust, you see, because of what you're doing here. You've just made this promise, and now you are breaking it with both feet and all your hands. So anyway, so again, it's not just a fit of anger for Moses as well. The tablets were the work of God and the writing of God engraved upon those tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, so now he's joined back up with Joshua, who was down a little lower. He said to Moses, there's a noise of war in the camp. See, he's just hearing the going on down there. But he said, and if he's hearing the song, you see, the victory song, oh, well, that's the sound of war, isn't it? So that's what he's hearing. But Moses said, that's not the sound made by victors or the sound made by losers. That's the sound of revelers that I hear. As soon as Moses, came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. And he threw the tablets from his hands, and he broke them at the foot of the mountain. And now this wonderfully disgusting little picture. He took the calf that they had made, he burned it with fire, he ground it to powder, he scattered it on the water. Now this is recounted again in the early chapters of Deuteronomy. Moses telling it, this is what I did. And what he says, I don't know if you caught this, Brad Sherrill put this in the story because it kind of makes you think, on the water, what water? Did they have water in the cups, or where was the water? In Deuteronomy it says, and threw it in the water of the stream. So in other words, and the Jewish rabbis go on to say, and this would have been the only stream in the area likely, so this is their only source of water. He threw it into the water, but now here's the key point, and he made the Israelites drink it. Ew. Now, why does he do that? So anyway, he's angry. He breaks the tablets, but it's a symbolic picture. He's saying to them, you've broken these things. You have crushed the covenant. So in a way, he completely breaks them. And an interesting little humanized Yahweh point. And a little bit later, Yahweh will say, we need to remake those tablets that you broke. It's just funny. Again, it almost goes down to, pals joshing with each other or talking to each other. But now what about the Numbers 5, verse 12 through, I think it goes to 31, is a picture of what to do with a wife who's been cheating on her husband. And the husband can't prove it. And what it says is, the priest will go into the tabernacle and take a cup, and will gather dirt from the floor of the tabernacle. So now, let's see, there's been incense burning in there, the bread, they've all just walking in from slaughtering all these animals. So anyway, so here's the floor inside. He'll gather up some dirt, he'll put it in the cup, and then he'll say these words to the woman, if you have not done anything wrong, then you'll be able to drink this and you'll still have children. If you have done this and wronged your husband in this way, you will drink this, and what Numbers says is, and your uterus will dry up and will fall out of you, will drop out of you. And you'll never have children. You won't be able to bear any more children. So in other words, the woman drinks it, and it's and it's like it's a test. And it's called a trial by ordeal. So you drink this. If you can stand the gluggy stuff, you say, oh well, you must be honest enough to say. And the woman has to sort of look the priest back in the eye and say, amen, amen. And so, but if you haven't, see, well then, in a way, the whole process of the holiness of the tabernacle entering you will because you're violating your covenant. Now, we don't have to think too much more about that picture, but that's what Moses is doing, is simulating this trial by ordeal. And it answers a question to the next part. You know what Brad Sherrill left out is the next part, namely what the Levites do because of as the punishment for this. But anyway, we're not there yet. But anyway, most people would say that's what's happening. It's a trial by ordeal. And so when these people drink the gold, the notion is some of them are, most of them probably, but a lot of them anyway, are going to get sick. And but presumably others of them, whose hearts didn't turn to the reveling that was going on, will be able to stand it, and they'll end up, as it were, surviving. Moses said to Aaron, so now he comes down, he's left, remember the last thing he said was, if you have any trouble here, anything disputes, y'all go and talk to Aaron, and I'll be back. And so now he's come back. So now, Aaron, what have you done? Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you've brought so great a sin upon them? The other thing about the little trial by ordeal in Numbers is it's specifically tied to the sin of adultery. And why would Moses choose that as the ordeal? Well, in a way, it's a little beginning that goes through the whole life of the people of Israel. The prophets, forever after this, when they will talk about the unfaithfulness of the people, they will use the symbolism of you are married to Yahweh and your unfaithfulness is your adultery to Him. So that becomes the standard image. So Moses is here sort of starting, or at least going on with a tradition, but I mean he's seen as the first of the prophets, so he's starting this tradition that all the prophets will pick up on, and all of the great preaching prophets use this image, sort of capped off by Hosea, of course, who makes his own marriage with this woman who goes back and forth between a life of prostitution. So that particular image of the relationship between Yahweh and Israel as a marriage relationship, and Yahweh as Israel's wife and as an unfaithful wife. So that's why he uses that particular symbol. But notice Moses says to Aaron, what did this people do to you? Now remember, again, also what's in his head, still in Moses' head, is the consecrating of Aaron. Remember, he had this whole ritual for making Aaron holy and ordaining him and setting him apart. He hasn't done any of that yet. So while he's been up here imagining kind of in his head, Aaron and his sons will, they will be the faithful ones who are in charge of the tabernacle. Aaron will be the high priest. He's the one who will be in charge of sort of carrying the prayers of the people into Yahweh day by day and morning and evening. That hasn't happened yet in reality. So when he comes down now, he's confronting Aaron, and Aaron also is really not up to the task, or at least he's not that person that whatever Moses has in his head about him. And one of the things that Moses can't imagine is these people must have whooped you if you did this, if you so easily allowed them to do this thing against the covenant, the laws of God that we just heard, and we all said we'll do everything Yahweh said. So if you've done that, I assume they must have been down here beating on you. That's what he wants to hear Aaron say, that you did so great a sin. And that phrase, a great sin, that phrase is always used in the Old Testament to speak about the sin of adultery. So that's what he's saying to them. Why did you act in this adulterous way, the people in this way? And he'll say that later. You have sinned a great sin. Well, that little phrase, a great sin, appears numerous times in the Old Testament, always about adultery, not about any other sin. So anyway, that relationship is the one that's unique, or that characterizes the relationship of Yahweh and the people. But Aaron said, oh, don't let the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know this people, that they're bent on evil. So now, what's the first thing that happens in the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve eat the thing? God says, Adam, what have you done? And what does he say? Yeah, well, this woman, well, come to think of it, you gave me the woman, so this is really your fault if you think about it, So, well, that's what Aaron, these people, they've been acting crazy all this time, So, of course they're acting crazy. You don't get worried about that. You see, they've already been doing that. And he's definitely, just completely passing off well, yes, Aaron, I do know how crazy the people are. That's why I left you in charge of them, because you are my brother and you've been at the head of the stack every time with me while I've been leading them. I said to you, you're leading them now. Why didn't you lead them? Or how did you lead them? 23, they said to me, make us gods who'll go before us. As for this Moses, they did say that, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. So I said to them, whoever has gold, take it off. They gave it to me. I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. It couldn't be more feckless and stupid, but in effect he's saying, it's a miracle, Moses, The calf just made itself up, look, we all thought this was Yahweh helping us out, and basically is what he's saying. 25, when Moses saw that the people were running wild, for Aaron had let them run wild to the derision of their enemies. Nobody knows what that means unless it's a later commentator inserting that little parenthetical comment. They were running wild. When Moses saw that, he stood at the gate of the camp and he said, "Who is on Yahweh's side? Come to me." Now we think of Joshua saying this. It's so famous at the end of Joshua's book, decide this day whom you'll serve. But notice, in effect, he learns it from Moses here, and Moses is the one who starts it. But now, here's the little piece, and I talked to Brad Sherrill about this. I mean, he mentioned it to me, that when you put together a piece, he said, well, he said to me, well, what people don't remember is what happens immediately after the golden calf episode. He said, I just left that out. You have to decide what you're going to have put in there or not. But anyway, here's what he left out. Who's on the Lord's side? Come to me. And all the sons of Levi, now those are his relatives and Aaron's relatives and Aaron's sons, all the sons of Levi gathered around him, that's their tribe. He said to them, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, strap on your sword, each one of you, go back and forth from gate to gate throughout this camp, and each of you kill your brother, your friend, and your neighbor." Now, how do they identify who you see has had the great sin? Well, that's the point of the ordeal, you see, of drinking the gook was, well, now you can see, basically, everybody who's laying on the ground, balled up, and then, okay, they're in effect saying to you, this is our punishment for doing this. 28, and the sons of Levi did as Moses commanded, and about 3,000 of the people fell on that day. And Moses said, "Today you have ordained yourselves for the service of Yahweh, each one at the cost of a son or a brother, and so you have brought a blessing on yourselves this day." Now that's very hard for us to read, but it says two things. A, this is how the Levites got to be the dedicated group. In terms of the whole story, what it's saying is there was a group that didn't turn their hearts away from Yahweh. And the sons of Levi and all of those that they didn't kill, 3,000, this perfect kind of rounded number. Many people say this is just a symbolic number to say a lot of them. 3,000 out of, well, how many are out there? Well, there's hundreds of thousands out there. So anyway, it's a representative number, but in a way the point is the elevation of the Levites, and the tragic part of it is, remember, part of the instruction of the tabernacle that Moses carried in his head was he was going to ordain all this family already. So they have shown themselves faithful. Okay, they will be good caretakers of the tabernacle because they have maintained their devotion to Yahweh through this whole episode. But the tragedy of it is they had to do it at the cost of people that they knew or that they were even intimately members of their own family. So in a way, this is a very grisly kind of thing that he's saying. Today you have ordained yourselves. In other words, you have shown that you were set apart. You kept your heads and your heart devoted to Yahweh while all this was going on. But you have also, because of it, suffered this great loss. Verse 30, on the next day Moses said to the people, "You've sinned a great sin. But now I will go up to Yahweh. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." Now he's been on the mountain 40 days. Now I'm going right back up. But he has to, you see. And now here's a place where literally Moses now very clearly steps into the problem that is, in a way, the New Testament's answer, and says, this is what Jesus Christ alone could do. It may be, he says, that I can go up and make atonement. And that word is kippur, the same that was used for the mercy seat, the covering. It may be that I can cover your sin, that I can, and then our English translations just say make atonement, but it's literally I may cover your sin like the mercy seat. But of course, the mercy seat hadn't been made yet. There's not one yet. So Moses returned to Yahweh and said, "Alas, this people has sinned a great sin." There's that phrase. "They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now if you will only forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out of the book that you've written." Now what's he asking? It's very clear that this is an image, the book that God has. There are different books. And one of the books is kind of the book of judgment. He's not talking about that one. But there's also the book of life, those who are now living. And he's saying, in effect, kill me, take my life, in other words. So what he's offering to do is what you and I see on the cross. He's saying, let my life be a covering for the sin of this people. And so, in a way, this is the limitation of Moses. God doesn't accept that offering. In a way, we could say, in the book of Hebrews will say later, well, Moses can't really make that offering. Why? Because he's a sinner too. His life doesn't cover the debt. You know, he doesn't have enough value to offer that payment. So it's a beautiful thing that Moses is doing here, and we see Moses again being lifted higher and higher as the example for all people. And we can begin to see, I don't know about you, it's oftentimes I think of, well, now Jesus is the obvious pinnacle of the world, but many times as Christians, I don't always look back at Moses and say, well, no, he's the greatest guy who ever lived before Jesus. But I think in this portrait of Exodus, he clearly is being painted that way. And I think he is thought that way in Jewish tradition. So anyway, here's a good place to see that and say, oh, well, this is why. Because Moses did all of these things. He didn't just speak for God. He also went and, in effect, offered to be the Christ, to be the sin bearer, to be the sin coverer. And so if you won't, then just take my life. But Yahweh said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. See, in other words, I'll punish those who still need it. But now go, lead the people to the place about which I've spoken to you. Look, my angel shall go in front of you. Nevertheless, when the day comes for punishment, I will punish them for their sin. Then Yahweh sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. I got to think it might be the other people who ate the gold and didn't fall down, you know, who hadn't been killed. They still might have gotten way sick. Anyway. All right, so now the end of chapter 33, the beginning. Yahweh said to Moses, go leave this place, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt. Go to the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your descendants I'll give it. So notice, Yahweh seems to be back on track. Okay, but there's still this problem of, but now wait. Now we've broken the covenant that this was supposed to be the pinnacle and the cover and the culmination of. But so he says, okay, I'm back on track with my purpose and my promises. To your descendants I'll give it. I will send an angel before you. Now notice, he just said to Moses, I'll send my angel. Now he doesn't say that. He says, I'll send an angel. Is he backing up again? Well, apparently he is. And I will drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Okay, well, that's the old promise. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey. That's the old promise. But notice, but I will not go among you, says Yahweh, or I would consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. Now remember, this vision is still only in Moses' head, and it's so beautiful. Every place we go, we will camp, and you'll be right among us. And Yahweh has said, that is my plan. Now he says, now wait, this sin has been so great, I can say, okay, I can go with you, Moses, with the plan being on, but I can't go anymore. Why? Because you couldn't tolerate it, and I couldn't tolerate to be in your presence. I couldn't stand to be with you without wiping you out. So how, in other words, how will we deal with that kind of intractable obstacle? When the people heard these harsh words, they mourned. No one put on ornaments. Yahweh had said to Moses, say to the Israelites, you're a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. So now take off your ornaments. I'll decide what to do to you. Therefore the Israelites stripped themselves of their ornaments. So they're going in grief, in mourning, from Mount Horeb onward. Now Moses used to take a tent. Now here's a little parentheses, the 7 through 11. Just to describe, in a way, what Moses used to do. And in a way, this is a kind of the precursor to the tabernacle. Moses had his own little setup for when the people said, you go speak to Yahweh alone and speak for us, but we can't go in. They had already articulated that problem, you see, from their side, out of their fear. We can't get close to him because we do fear that he'll consume us. They'd said, you go do that. And so here's what, in a way, it's a little reminiscence about how Moses from his side, was approaching this problem of, well, how do we contact God then for this people? And in a way, it's a beautiful little telling. Now, Moses used to take the tent, and this is on his own, of course. He didn't know about the tabernacle when he was doing this. And he pitched it outside the camp, far off from the camp. He called it the tent of meeting. But notice it's just a meeting between him and Yahweh. It's not the tent of meeting in the middle of the people. And everyone who sought Yahweh would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. So you see, there's the separation, in effect, that Yahweh was saying, I've got to have that. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise and stand, each of them at the entrance of their tents. And they would watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent. And Yahweh would speak with Moses. And nobody else is there. When all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise and bow down, all of them at the entrance of their tent. Thus Yahweh used to speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Then he would return to the camp, but his young assistant, Joshua, son of Nun, would not leave the tent. It's a beautiful little picture of, in a way, the kind of the elements that the tent of meeting was all about. God adds a sanctuary to it and says, well, there also ought to be this place, the Holy of Holies, attached to, in effect, to your tent of meeting, where I could dwell and the people could know always. He's always right there. In Moses' little ritual, only when Moses goes, Yahweh descends for that moment to speak to him. Moses said to Yahweh, now we're back to kind of present time of Yahweh dealing with the problem. Now God has just said to him, I won't go with you. I can't do that. Look, you've said to me, bring up this people, but you've not let me know whom you will send with me. You see, are you going to wipe out more of my camp? Are we all ready to go now? Yet you've said, I know you by name. You see, you told me I'm special. You've said to me that I've found favor in your sight. Now, if I have found favor in your sight, show me your ways, that I may know you and find favor in your sight. Consider, too, that this nation is your people. Yahweh said, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Is he speaking singly to Moses? It seems like it. And he said to him, so Moses said back, if your presence won't go, don't carry us up from here. You see, don't give us a half of a plan. You were going to do all this stuff, but now you're saying, well, I'll do it and I'll watch you from a distance? No, you have to go with us. Moses says, how shall it be known that I've found favor in your sight, I and your people, unless you go with us? In this way, we'll be distinct, I and your people, from every people on the face of the earth. Yahweh said to Moses, I'll do the very thing you've asked. You have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. Moses said, show me your glory, I pray. In other words, you see, let me see you sign on the dotted line. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you. I'll proclaim before you the name Yahweh. Now remember, Yahweh is the name he gave him at the very beginning. And so it was the making of the relationship. What's been broken in the tablets? Well, this relationship. And so Moses, in effect, is saying, how do we get back to that place where I know you're all in with us and I can commit all the people to you? And so now when Yahweh says, okay, in effect, we're going to go back to that beginning time when I gave you my name and said, I'm acting, this is how I'll act. I will make my goodness pass before you. I'll proclaim before you the name Yahweh. I will be gracious to whom I'll be gracious, and I'll show mercy on whom I'll show mercy. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no one shall see me and live. And Yahweh continued, look, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. While my glory passes by, I'll put you in a cleft of the rock, and I'll cover you with my hand until I've passed by. Then I'll take away my hand, and you shall see my back. My face shall not be seen. It's a strange little promise, but anyway, it's more than anybody else has gotten. So, and that's the key point, both to be covered by God's own hand, and then you'll see me, you'll see my back. Now, chapter 34, I want to just read the very first of it. Yahweh said to Moses, cut 2 tablets of stone like the former ones. I will write on the tablets the words that were on the former tablets, which you broke. Be ready in the morning. Come up on the morning to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you. Don't let anyone be seen, not let anyone be seen throughout all the mountain. Don't let the flocks or herds graze in front of that mountain. So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the former ones. He rose early in the morning. He went up to Mount Sinai. Just as Yahweh commanded, he took in his hand the 2 tablets of stone. Yahweh descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed his name, Yahweh. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed. Now our new RSV sets this off in a little poetic form. And Nahum Sarna, this wonderful Jewish commentator, taught at Brandeis University, kind of the Jewish university of the Northeast, says that this has passed into, oh, well, I wrote it down. Let me read it to you. In Jewish tradition, these verses, verse 6 and 7, are called the 13 attributes of God. Now, you'll have to count those on your own. I couldn't really make 13 come out in any simple, easy fashion there, but notice it's as poetry, it's set out as a little liturgy. Yahweh, Yahweh, the Lord, God, you have heard this 100 times, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, yet by no means clearing the guilty, but visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children and children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. Sarna says this, these words play a prominent role in Jewish liturgy where they are recited aloud in the synagogue on festivals and other holy days when the ark is opened for the taking out of the Torah scroll in readiness for the appropriate Torah reading. Where's the Ark of the Covenant now? Nobody knows that the Jews open the Ark of the Covenant every Saturday, every Friday night. How do they do that? They have renamed the cabinet behind the pulpit where they keep the scroll that holds the Torah on it, that they read for every worship time and have their service about it. They call that cabinet, the containing space, you see, for the Torah now. They call that the Ark of the Covenant. So in other words, they call whatever you carry your Bible in, they call that the Ark. That's the box, the container of the covenant. Where's the covenant? Well, it's in the Torah. It's in the Word of God. So that's what Sarna is referring to. Every time they do that, they say these words. They're also chanted aloud during the Torah readings on fast days and on the penitential days recited at Yom Kippur and the High Holy Day period. So anyway, I just wanted you to see that. Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and he worshiped. He said, if now I've found favor in your sight, O Lord, notice he says Lord and not Yahweh, I pray let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, pardon our iniquity and our sin and take us for your inheritance. He said, I hereby make a covenant before all your people. I'll perform such marvels as not been performed in any nation. All the people among whom you live shall see the work of the Lord, for it's an awesome thing that I will do. Now what I want you to see is that, notice the whole rest of this chapter is in effect a retelling of those in a shortened form of those laws that we called the Book of the Covenant earlier. So it's just saying God is renewing the covenant. God is saying, okay, we're back together and we both have this experience of what stands before us. And at the end of that, verse 26 is that same enigmatic verse that we read before. The best of the first fruits you shall bring to the house of Yahweh your God, and ending with, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. We still don't know what it means, but it's right there. It was kept and renewed. And now Yahweh said to Moses, write these words in accordance with these words, I've made a covenant. So in other words, here's the binding covenant agreement. He was there with Yahweh 40 days and nights. He neither ate bread or drank water. He wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. And now the end. Moses came down from Mount Sinai. I want you to have this picture in your mind. As he came down from the mountain, the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hand, Moses didn't know the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face was shining. They were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses spoke with them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near. He gave them in commandment all that Yahweh had spoken on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. That whenever Moses went in before Yahweh to speak, he would take the veil off until he came out. When he came out, he told the Israelites what had been commanded. They would see the face of Moses. His face was shining. Moses would put the veil on his face again until he went in to speak with him. So the end of this whole little thing is, now still, what do they need? They need this space where something can draw near to God. Notice the tabernacle has these veils. So for this moment, until they manage to build the tabernacle, Moses going up and down Mount Sinai, remember the zones and going in the space, he's the only one who goes into that private space where God is at the top of the mountain. When he comes down, like the tabernacle veil that says, God's really here, but you can't go back there. Moses, so to speak, is the tabernacle in person until we get this tabernacle constructed. So next week, as I said, a lot of this is repetition, so we'll really speak more about just connections between the Exodus and this book, and sort of how it's a foundation to so many things in the New Testament. Well, thanks. That was a good long section, but let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for these stories, for how they tie together, for how they come together in our minds and imaginations. Thank you for how you used your servant Moses to teach us, to show us, to give us all of these things. And thank you for that greater Moses who has come and made possible us not only to draw near you, but to dwell in your midst without fear, and knowing that you are working in us and through us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.